Welcome to Copilot Podcasts. Every AI tool you use today, every smart recommendation, every chatbot, every hiring filter was built on a graveyard of spectacular failures that most people have completely forgotten about. Today, we're digging up those disasters, what they were, why they kept happening for eerily similar reasons, and what they actually forced the industry to fix. By the end of this episode, you'll understand the hidden architecture of failure underneath modern AI, recognize the warning signs when a new AI system is about to go sideways, and see why the most important breakthroughs didn't come from success. They came from things going very, very wrong. I've got someone here who has been deep in this history, and I want to start with a question that's been bugging me. How do you even begin to map a graveyard this big?
You start by realizing the graveyard is way bigger than anyone admits. According to Rand Corporation research published in 2024, more than 80% of AI projects fail. And here's the part that really stops you cold. That's twice the failure rate of regular IT projects that don't involve AI at all.
Wait, twice the rate? So AI is actually harder to get right than regular software?
Significantly harder. And what's wild is that the same survey Rand cited found that 84% of business leaders believe AI will have a significant impact on their business. And 97% said the urgency to deploy AI has increased. But only 14% of organizations felt fully ready to actually integrate it. So you've got this massive gap between confidence and capability.
That gap is kind of terrifying when you think about it. Like, everyone's rushing in, but almost nobody's prepared.
And that's not a new problem. That's actually the oldest problem in AI history.
The search results I've been looking at describe how AI's journey has never been linear. It's been punctuated by what researchers call AI winters. These are periods where the hype crashes hard into reality, funding dries up, and the whole field goes quiet for years. AI winters, I love that term. It's so bleak but accurate.
It really is. And the first one traces back to the 1950s and 60s, which is further back than most people realize. There was this iconic Dartmouth workshop where researchers laid the groundwork for what they called symbolic AI. The idea that you could replicate human intelligence by formalizing knowledge into explicit rules and logic. They built systems like the logic theorist and the general problem solver.
And those actually worked, right? At least a little?
They worked in very narrow, constrained domains. They could solve specific math theorems, but the ambition was to scale that to general human intelligence. And the real world turned out to be far more complex than the models could handle. That gap between what the technology could do and what researchers promised it could do, that's the template for every AI failure that came after.
So the overconfidence was baked in from the very beginning.
Completely. And there's actually a framework that explains why this keeps repeating. The Gartner hype cycle maps how every new technology goes through a peak of inflated expectations, then crashes into what they call a trough of disillusionment, before eventually, if it survives, reaching real productive use.
Oh, that's such a useful lens. And honestly, we've watched this play out in real time recently, right? Like, the metaverse was supposed to be everything, and then it just wasn't.
Exactly. NFTs too. Sky-high expectations, then they faded into obscurity pretty fast. And the concern that some researchers have raised is that AI is currently riding that same roller coaster. It's not immune to the same pattern.
Which makes the failures we're about to talk about feel a lot more relevant to right now than just being history lessons.
That's exactly the point. These aren't just cautionary tales from a dusty textbook. They're the direct ancestors of the guardrails and design principles in the AI tools people use every day. So let's get into the actual cases, because they're wild.
Yes, please. Where do you want to start?
Microsoft Tay, 2016. Microsoft launched Tay as a conversational AI chatbot on Twitter, meant to showcase how AI could engage in natural dialogue. Within hours, not days, hours, it was manipulated by trolls into producing racist, offensive, and deeply inappropriate content. Microsoft shut it down within 24 hours.
24 hours. That's a spectacular failure.
It really is. But here's why it matters beyond just being embarrassing for Microsoft. Maitri's research on AI failures makes this point really clearly. An AI system replicates the social values of its developers, and it also embeds whatever it's exposed to into its outputs. Tay had no safeguards against manipulation. It just learned from what people fed it, and people fed it the worst of the internet.
So the lesson wasn't just add a filter. It was something deeper about how AI absorbs and amplifies whatever environment it's placed in.
Precisely. And Maitri's research puts it this way. AI systems can centralize and amplify influence over many people's behaviors in a way that a single human decision never could. Tay was a small-scale preview of that amplification problem. Every modern AI safety team that thinks about adversarial inputs and content moderation is, in some way, responding to what happened with Tay.
Okay, so Tay taught the industry about manipulation and safeguards. What's the next one?
Amazon's hiring tool. This one ran from 2014 to 2018, and it's a masterclass in what happens when you train AI on biased data. Amazon built an AI system to screen job applicants for tech roles. The problem was it was trained on a decade of internal hiring data that came predominantly from male candidates, because the tech industry has historically been male-dominated.
So the AI just learned that men were the right answer.
Exactly. The system learnt to penalize resumes that included words like women's, as in women's chess club, and it downgraded graduates from all women's colleges. It was systematically discriminating against female applicants, and it did it invisibly, at scale, for years before it was caught. Amazon eventually scrapped the tool entirely in 2018.
And the thing that gets me is that nobody at Amazon sat down and said, let's build a sexist hiring tool. The bias was invisible in the data.
That's the most important insight from this case. Maitri's research frames it this way. AI systems replicate the social values of their developers, often unintentionally. The choices, assumptions, and trade-offs that go into building a system get encoded as the new standard. And in Amazon's case, the historical inequality of the tech industry got encoded as the definition of a good candidate.
That's a really uncomfortable mirror to hold up.
It is, and it directly shaped how modern AI developers think about training data. The push for diverse datasets, bias audits, and fairness testing in AI systems today, a huge part of that traces back to Amazon's very public failure.
Okay, I want to bring up the UK A-level situation because I think it connects to this in a really specific way. Walk me through what happened there.
So this was 2020 during the COVID-19 pandemic. The UK government cancelled in-person exams and used an AI algorithm to assign students their A-level grades instead. The algorithm was supposed to be a fair substitute. It was not.
What went wrong?
The system disproportionately downgraded students from disadvantaged backgrounds while favouring students from elite schools. So kids who had worked incredibly hard, who might have been the first in their family to go to university, got grades that didn't reflect their ability, grades that could close doors to their futures. The public outrage was immediate. There were protests, and the government eventually scrapped the algorithm entirely.
That's not just a technical failure. That's a failure that had real consequences for real teenagers' lives.
Completely. And it illustrates something that Maitri's research flags as a core danger. People can be influenced to trust AI more than they should. The government trusted the algorithm to be impartial. But an automated decision is never neutral. Outcomes always affect people differently, and in this case, they affected the most vulnerable students the worst.
It's almost like the algorithm inherited the inequalities of the school system it was measuring.
That's a really precise way to put it. And that's exactly the lesson that modern AI designers in education and public policy have had to grapple with. You can't just automate a broken system and call it fair.
Let's talk about IBM Watson for oncology, because that one feels different to me. That's not a chatbot or a hiring filter. That's AI being used in cancer treatment.
Right, and the stakes are obviously much higher. IBM's Watson for Oncology was launched with enormous fanfare as a revolutionary tool for personalized cancer treatment. The idea was that it could analyze patient data and recommend treatment plans. But by 2018, it had encountered significant setbacks, inaccurate recommendations, and in some cases, unsafe ones.
Unsafe how?
The Harvard Ethics Center's analysis of this case points to the core problem. Watson for Oncology relied heavily on synthetic data rather than real-world patient data. So it was essentially trained on hypothetical cases, not actual clinical experience. The accuracy and efficacy of its recommendations were insufficient, and IBM ultimately discontinued the solution. The Harvard researchers made a pointed observation. This might have been a problem better left to humans, specifically oncologists with years of specialized training and highly contextual knowledge of the human body.
So it's not just about the data being bad, it's about the problem being too complex for the AI at that stage.
Exactly. And that maps directly to one of the 5 root causes that RAND identified in their 2024 research. They found that AI projects fail when the technology is applied to problems that are too difficult for AI to solve. Their exact framing was, AI is not a magic wand that can make any challenging problem disappear.
I feel like that quote should be printed on a poster in every AI startup's office.
Honestly, it should. And Rand's research identified 4 other root causes alongside that one. Organizations misunderstand what problem actually needs to be solved. They lack sufficient training data. They focus on using the latest technology instead of solving real problems for real users. And they don't have adequate infrastructure to deploy the models they build.
So it's not one thing that kills AI projects, it's this whole cluster of interconnected mistakes.
And what's striking is that you can trace almost every major failure we've talked about back to at least one of those 5 causes. Tay, no safeguards, wrong problem framing. Amazon, bad training data. Watson for oncology, problem too complex, insufficient real-world data. The UK grading algorithm, misaligned metrics, no fairness infrastructure.
It's like the same 5 mistakes, just wearing different costumes.
That's a really good way to put it. And Fraunhofer USA's research from 2025 reinforces this. They found that between 2013 and 2022, private sector investment in AI grew by 18-fold. 18 times. But the failure rate didn't drop proportionally. More money didn't automatically mean better outcomes.
Wait, so even with all that investment, the same patterns kept repeating? They did, because money doesn't fix a culture of rushing to deploy. And Maitri's research flags this as one of the most persistent tensions in the field. There's a global pressure to develop and deploy AI quickly, and that speed directly conflicts with understanding and mitigating the impacts. When AI systems scale faster than humans can respond, you have to rely on the guardrails built into the system. And if those guardrails were skipped to hit a deadline, you're in trouble.
That tension feels very alive right now, not just historically.
Very much so. And the 2024 data from Huntsville AI's analysis of that year's failures shows it's still happening. A major healthcare provider's diagnostic AI misidentified critical conditions in 30% of cases during trials. A retail brand replaced 80% of its human support staff with AI chatbots and saw a 25% decline in customer satisfaction within 6 months. These aren't ancient history, they're recent. 30% misidentification in healthcare diagnostics. That's not a margin of error, that's a crisis.
It is, and it echoes Watson for oncology almost exactly. The lesson keeps needing to be relearned.
But here's the other side of this. Every time one of these failures happens publicly, it does force a reckoning. The Harvard Ethics Center's framing is actually quite generous to the industry on this point. They say examining the past is a vital step toward ensuring a safer and more ethically conscious future. The failures aren't just cautionary tales, they're the curriculum.
The failures are the curriculum. I really like that framing. And you can see it in how the industry has evolved. The push for bias audits after Amazon. The content moderation frameworks after Tay. The emphasis on real-world clinical data after Watson. The fairness and transparency requirements in public sector AI after the UK grading disaster. None of those things came from success, they came from watching things break.
So in a weird way, the failures were load-bearing. They held up the structure of what came next.
Exactly. And I think that's the counterintuitive truth about AI's history that most people miss when they look at the shiny tools we have now. They see the product, they don't see the wreckage it was built on.
Let me push back on something, though, because I think there's a version of this argument that's too optimistic. Like, yes, failures teach lessons, but the UK students who got downgraded in 2020 didn't benefit from that lesson. The lesson came at their expense.
That's a completely fair challenge, and it's important. The Harvard Ethics Center makes this point too. They commend companies that acted swiftly to address negative societal impacts. But they're clear that the entrepreneurship at the core of AI innovation doesn't excuse the harm caused. The lesson being learned doesn't undo the damage to the people who experienced the failure.
Right. And I think that's why the Maitre framing about holding AI to a higher standard matters so much. Because the scale of AI means the failures aren't just inconvenient, they can be life-altering for real people.
Absolutely. Maitri's research puts it this way. The problems present in previous generations of automated technology are now exacerbated by the scope and scale of AI. One person making a bad decision affects one person. An AI making a bad decision can affect millions simultaneously. That's a fundamentally different kind of responsibility.
And that's what makes the 80+% failure rate so alarming. It's not just wasted money, it's wasted trust, and sometimes real harm.
Right. And Fraunhofer's research recommends something that sounds simple but is actually a significant cultural shift: engaging neutral external organizations to validate AI models rather than relying solely on internal teams, because internal teams are too close to the work, too invested in the outcome to catch the blind spots.
It's like asking someone else to proofread your own writing. You need fresh eyes.
Exactly that. And the Springer research on historical AI failures makes the point that understanding the Gartner hype cycle and the AI winters isn't just academic, it's a practical tool for identifying pitfalls before you fall into them. The pattern is documented, the warning signs are known. The question is whether organizations slow down enough to look for them.
And based on the failure rates we've been talking about, a lot of them aren't slowing down.
Not nearly enough. The CIO survey from 2025 found that 42% of CIOs say AI and machine learning are their biggest technology priority. That's a massive concentration of attention and resources. And the pressure to deploy fast hasn't eased. If anything, it's intensified. So the conditions that produced all these failures are still very much present.
So when you step back from everything we've covered, the AI winters, Tay, Amazon, Watson, the UK grading disaster, the root causes, the failure rates, what does it all actually add up to?
It adds up to a field that has been learning the same hard lessons over and over, sometimes at enormous human cost, and slowly building those lessons into the infrastructure of how AI gets made. The bias audits, the human oversight requirements, the emphasis on real-world data, the safeguards against manipulation, none of that was invented in a lab. It was extracted from failure.
And the failures that haven't been learned from yet are probably still coming.
Almost certainly. Maitre's research is honest about this. There's an irreducible tension between the global pressure to deploy AI quickly and the time it takes to understand and mitigate its impacts. That tension doesn't resolve itself. It has to be actively managed every time by every team building every system.
Here's what this really comes down to, I think. The story of AI isn't a straight line from primitive to powerful. It's more like a spiral. You keep coming back to the same problems, but hopefully a little higher up each time, with a little more knowledge about what breaks and why.
That's a really precise way to describe it. And the knowledge only accumulates if people actually study the failures. The Rice AI analysis puts it well. Understanding historical AI failures isn't merely an academic exercise. It's a critical foundation for preventing future missteps. You can't build something more robust if you don't understand what made the last version collapse.
And for anyone listening who works in tech, or who uses AI tools, or who's just trying to figure out whether to trust the next thing that gets launched, what's the most actionable thing they can take from all of this?
Ask what the system was trained on. That single question cuts through so much noise. Amazon's tool failed because of what it was trained on. Watson failed because of what it was trained on. The UK algorithm failed because of what it was trained on. If you can't get a clear answer to that question, that's your warning sign.
That's such a concrete, usable thing. Not be skeptical of AI in some vague way, just ask what it learnt from.
And ask who it was tested on. Because the other pattern that runs through all of these failures is that the people who bore the cost of the failure, the women screened out by Amazon, the disadvantaged students downgraded in the UK, were not the people who designed the system or validated it. Diverse testing catches what homogeneous testing misses.
2 questions. What was it trained on, and who was it tested on? That's a genuinely useful framework.
Simple, but powerful. And honestly, if more organizations had asked those 2 questions before deploying, a lot of the graveyard we've been walking through today would be a lot smaller.
We started this episode with the idea that every AI tool you use today was built on a graveyard of failures. And I think what we've actually found is something slightly more hopeful than that. It's not just a graveyard. It's a foundation. A messy, costly, sometimes harmful foundation, but a foundation nonetheless.
And the foundation only holds if we keep remembering what's in it. The moment we treat AI as solved, as something that just works, is the moment we stop asking the questions that keep it from failing the next generation of people who depend on it.
More than 80% of AI projects fail, twice the rate of regular software. That number should live rent-free in the head of anyone building or deploying AI right now. Not as a reason to stop, but as a reason to slow down just enough to ask the right questions. Thanks for being here for this one on Copilot Podcasts. The next time you see a shiny new AI tool launch, you'll know exactly what to ask.